This week on the Virtual Skeptics. Bob is he's gonna party like it's 1999 again. So just give it in color. And Tim is whatever. I have no idea where Tim is. I'm your host, Brian Gregory.
I couldn't hear you at all. So.
You couldn't hear me at all? How about now if I'd like to eat the microphone?
I think the music was just too loud.
Yeah. I blame the dog.
Okay.
He's gone now. Okay. The random chewing noises in the background is going to be this. There's a dog in the room with me. I'm not chewing things, but he is.
Sure.
Anyway. This is
How
that
good do you think your microphone is?
What?
How good do you think your microphone is? You can pick up chewing noises.
It's okay, Bob. I haven't done this in like a month, so I'm like totally out of sorts. I'm just gonna dive right in because usually we like do what intros or something. I don't know. Let me tell you who these people are.
I never watch it, so I don't know.
Yeah. This is Bob Blaskowitz, CSI's conspiracy guy, web columnist, blogger for Skeptical Humanities, and Skepticality contributor. And this is Eve Siebert, editor at blogger at Skeptical Humanities and contributor to Skepticality and Insight at skeptic.com. This is Barbara Drescher, former psychology instructor, blogger at ICBS Everywhere, and contributor to skeptical projects such as Insight without an S at skeptic.com and The Odds of So Crazy. Our fourth or fifth, I think it's fourth because I don't really count, isn't here. So I'm not going to tell you who he is. He's the mystery Tim guy.
Defending the internet from evil or something.
Probably. He's probably is, either
probably
running. He's either defending the internet from evil or he's running somewhere to get there. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to this thing that we do. If you want to get involved somehow while you watch, you can tweet at us on the Twitters with hashtag Virtual Skeptics, or you can wave and shout and dance, apparently, on YouTube. Well, not by video, but by the chat that's attached to this video. If you're watching it there, I see Ben Bradley, I see Pierre Cloutier, and Andrew Hansford. Hi, thanks for tuning in. You all are awesome. We don't do the trivia thing anymore, but if you can figure out what is playing on the screen behind me, please tell me, and I will give you credit for being awesome. Ding, ding,
Or
ding.
sex vouchers, one or the other.
What vouchers?
Nothing.
No, the dog just chewed those up.
Yes. Up first this week.
Getting back to... Never mind. I'm just a moron.
Shh.
Yeah.
Shh.
I know.
Shh. Okay. Up first this week is Barbara and her Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. So as usual, my ideas usually come from my Facebook feed. And once again, this one came from my Facebook feed because one of my friends posted one of those quizzes that we all love to do because we love to give our opinion and we love to get little paragraphs about ourselves and stuff like that. But this one had one of those headlines that makes me just cranky. It said, "Only people with perfect color vision can read these words." So I instantly knew I was looking for a topic for tonight, and there it was. So I clicked through. And by the way, I commented on the thread, and there ensued a discussion about the test. And two people who were colorblind and have been colorblind for as long as they can remember, because, once colorblind, always colorblind, said that they did just fine on the test. So I thought we would, do the little test, and then I'd take that opportunity. I thought it would be a nice opportunity to give a very, very basic tutorial on color vision and kind of explain why it's not a matter of, what perfect color vision is, because I don't know what that is. And just kind of give a little sort of mini lecture with very, very basic information about how we see color. Okay. So first, though, let's take the quiz. So I only have like 4 slides, but I thought it would be fun to do in particular because we have somebody on our panel who is colorblind.
What? Oh.
Bob's colorblind. Aren't you colorblind,
Well, I knew he
Bob?
had bad
I'm
taste,
red-green
but-
colorblind.
And there you go. Okay. So
He's
I want to see how
ace the
Bob does. I thought this would be really fun. So so there are 4, I've got 4 slides on here.
I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to talk though, because Brian said I said shut up. So
Okay,
if you
well
just
then
really-
pantomime
They
your
shushed you. It's
answer.
not the same thing.
I want to see you pantomime your answer. So I'm wondering.
Or interpretive dance is also accepted.
Yeah, I don't know if he can fit into the entire screen though. For the a little combination of interpretive dance and pantomime. So can you read that? Yes, it says tree.
Tree.
Can you go on to the next one, Brian?
Okay. Das.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, boot. Yep. Go on to the next one. They're all
I'm not
like this.
showing you that. No, it says park.
Yeah, there you go. And
That would be bead.
okay, so we have somebody who's red-green colorblind, and he had no
Perfectly
trouble.
red-green colorblind.
No trouble with it. So so which what does that make you do? Which one is that? What's that called? Your type of colorblindness.
Just red-green. I don't know what the.
Start with the. I think it's deuteranopia. I can't remember the names for each. I know what they technically
reject
are. I
labels.
just don't know which one is red green. It could be prototenopia or protenopia or deuteranopia. I think they're both red green colorblind because one is the absence of an L cone and one's the absence of an M cone. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to sort of talk about why this is a stupid test, especially since, you know, another friend had posted, hey, I thought this was just like this color sorting test that's often used for color blindness. And that's where you get a bunch of chips and you have to sort them in terms of, you know, going from one hue to another. So like this is between green and blue and this is to the left. This is more green than this and this one's more blue than that and so forth. And you have to sort them. And that requires that you distinguish between different hues. And so does this. But that doesn't make this a good test. So we have 3 cones, 3 types of receptors that respond to color. If you bring up the next slide, Brian. So
pretty.
we actually have 4 different types of receptors in our retinas. And this is the average person, but we have 3 that we call cones. And these have, what you're looking at here is the probability that the neuron will fire. See, a receptor is basically a neuron. It's a neuron. It's just a special type of neuron. And neurons don't give you a lot of information. It basically gives you binary information because either it fires or it doesn't fire. And that's it. You get on, off. That's it. The way that we get the rich response is, well, I'm going to get ahead of myself here. Each one of these receptors, we have 3 different types of receptors. One responds maximally to a wavelength. They all respond. Notice how they all respond to a wide range of wavelengths of light. Okay. But they each respond maximally to a specific wavelength. And we call that, you know, like the one on the left is the blue cone, that we actually call it S for short cone, short wavelength. So it responds maximally to what we call blue. And then we have one that responds maximally to what we call green and one that responds maximally to what we call red. Okay. But it actually, you'll notice it's sort of in the yellow.
Yeah, what the hell's that about? That's
Well,
that's not my fault,
it's
is
a little, it depends on how it's measured. These are actually measured in different ways. If you bring up the next slide, it's a very similar type of graph, and yet it's not quite the same. this is actually color matching. So this is something that was measured by having observers match colors. So they take things like, you know, this color and this color and say that these two match and these two don't match and so forth. And you do this over and over and over and over again until you actually have been able to map out how they respond to each color. This is really watered down. So
this is from a study in 1931?
Probably, yeah.
That's what it says.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that goes way back.
Did they use different color lighting conditions? Because I know that matters.
These are pure wavelengths of light. I mean, you have to isolate the lights. You have to get rid of the ambient light. If you're talking about color matching like chips, that has to be done in a very controlled environment where the ambient light is probably full daylight and so forth. So it is, all of these things are done in controlled conditions, but they all come up with very similar distributions like this. Okay, so the information that we get from these, because each cone responds to a range, but it responds to a range that has a curve to it, and so there's a peak, and so you know the probability that it's going to respond to, like a probability that the long wavelength cone is going to, or the L cone is going to respond to a wavelength of light that's 550 nanometers, is lower than if it's going to respond to, say, a 600 nanometer. So your brain doesn't know that, okay, but it does know, it does have this way of teasing out this information so that just the on-off of these different cones and the complex system of responses from various cells that these cones feed into give us this rich, this whole richness of our perceptual experience, because all of our receptors are basically on-off, and yet we get pitch in sound, we get loudness in sound, we get colors, we get all sorts of rich perceptual experiences, all from these on-offs. So it's very complicated, but I'm going to try to water it down a lot. So this is the distribution of cones by wavelength, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see that these cones don't feed directly into a single pathway. So it's not like you've got this much green and this much red and this much blue and then you mix it. It's a complex system of cells. These little circles here are what we call retinal ganglion cells. So we have red cones, or L cones and M cones, that feed into retinal ganglion cells. These are what we call center surrounds. So when the center's on, the surround's off, and vice versa. They inhibit each other and excite each other and so forth. And those get together, and then they feed with the blue cones, or the S cones, into another opponent system. So these are actually opponent processes. Okay, and this complex process is what all this richness of this information is what allows us to see the millions of colors that we can distinguish, all from just these three types of cones. If you go to the next slide, this might look familiar to some of you, especially if you're an artist. We have additive and subtractive color systems, depending on whether we're talking about light or we're talking about paint, right? So red, green, and blue are the primary colors of light, which is how we see. So that's why we sometimes call these L, M, and S cones red, green, and blue cones. But you'll notice that red one sort of looks like it's in the yellow. Well, that's why we call it an L cone and not a red cone, because it's long wavelength as opposed to red. And because not everybody classifies the cone or the colors in the same way. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But you'll see where they intersect. You've got cyan, magenta, and yellow. And does anybody know what those are primaries of? Those are primaries of ink. So in the printing process, printers actually do a 3-color separation, where they separate, a rich photo into just 3. Well, they usually do 4. They do black, but that's to conserve ink, because black is all of the inks. like white is all the colors in light.
CMYK.
CMYK. Exactly. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and K is black. But you don't have to use black. You can actually leave the black out, and you can pull out just these 3 colors. And if you mix them in the right amounts, you get a nice, rich, lifelike picture. And actually, I believe the next slide is one of those pictures. Yeah. Okay. So I used to do this actually use photographs. Like I would use a photograph of my kids or something, so that it really hits home.
This is
to
where
people.
they keep the zombies.
Yeah.
In
my classroom, I would do 2 demonstrations to show that opponent processes and trichromatic processes both work, or both at work in the eye. And one thing that you can do is you can take a negative of this picture. I didn't do it here, but you can take a negative of it, stare at a dot in the center, and then, for 30 seconds, and then move on to a white screen. And then guess what you see? You actually see this
zombies
picture the zombies start coming out of the barn. But you see this picture in all its glory just from staring at a negative, because what happens is all of the neurons that were firing to look at the negative get tired. And when you take the stimulus away, they've been inhibiting the neurons that aren't firing. And it's sort of like a rubber band. As soon as you stop inhibiting them, they start firing. So if you've seen after images. Cool. Everybody's seen after images, because you've seen a light bulb after it's, hit your eye. But if you've ever looked at like the green, yellow, and white flag, and you get, or the green, yellow, and black flag, and you get red, white, blue as an after image, you can do the same thing with these rich pictures, of real life pictures. You just stare at a dot in the center, put a dot in the very center, stare at the negative. And when you move on to a white screen, you get the positive. Well, so that's the opponent processes that I was talking about. Red versus green is an opponent. Those 2 together make yellow. When you mix red and green light together in equal amounts, you get fully saturated, you get yellow. And that is an opponent with blue. So these 2 things kind of fight at each other. Well, but you start with only 3 primaries. And those 3 primaries, when you pull them out, you can do what I would do in my classrooms after that was I would have transparencies. And the transparencies, I would do a 3-color separation of a photograph like this. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see it. And print them out on transparencies. Ooh. You have 1 cyan, 1 magenta, 1 yellow. And when you layer these transparencies, you get that image.
Whoa.
I don't believe you. I'm just kidding.
It is actually really, it's really something to see. Try to do it sometime. Use an overhead projector if you have any in your classrooms anymore. But it is really cool to look at. I know. Well, I meant the others you do, but but I don't think there are any overhead projectors in any classrooms anymore.
Digital cameras.
But I would do this in my intro classes, and it really is a stunning thing to see when you've got the physical things right in front of you. You can't deny it. There's no computer trick, and there's no camera trick to it. But when you layer those things together, you get a fine little image. So that's how we can take just 3 cones, 3 types of receptors, and create your brain, interprets all of this information. Most of that information actually is going through processes in the eye, and then it goes out to the brain, and you get this full, rich, landscape. So back to the cones. We go back to the cone slide, which is just the next slide.
Except for Bob, who experiences a drab and meaningless life.
except for poor Bob. So we have 3 of them, but people who are colorblind, like Bob, are missing one, or it doesn't function properly. For some people, they have the cones, but they don't function right. For others, it's just missing, and it's usually a genetic.
All my brothers.
Thing. All of your brothers? Really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, it and my sister's sons. God forbid she should breed.
Wow.
Yeah, will be.
That's amazing.
Yep. And it also means that my mom's dad must have been colorblind.
Wait a minute. What your sister's son wouldn't be because your father's not colorblind, is he?
No.
She can carry the gene though.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah.
And there's some interesting carriers, and some women are colorblind too. There's
It's much lower rate though.
yeah, it's a much lower rate. It's a much lower rate, and there are some carriers that have some interesting, and there's some women that have some interesting. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. Some interesting abnormalities to their color vision.
My sister-in-law had so much color blindness in her family that she could have been colorblind, but isn't.
That's interesting.
Apparently,
I just find it fascinating because it's not, it's supposed to be sort of rare, but you see these huge family, trees. That's really so. Anyway,
male pattern baldness. I'm pleased to say
she does or doesn't.
Doesn't.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you're pleased, she has it.
No.
It's like, how much do you dislike her?
No. Jeez.
Okay. So, anyway, what I was gonna talk about was the fact that they talk about perfect color vision. There is such a wide range. There's actually no limit to the number of wavelengths that can be distinguished, because wavelengths is basically a continuous thing. And there are animals with more cones than us. Sometimes many more. Like there's a shrimp that has like 10 cones. I can't even imagine what their visual experience is like, but I imagine that what they can do is distinguish from among many different hues of green and blue from swimming in the ocean. And so how those cones respond to light matters as well, how they respond. So if you think about this, and look at the next slide, there are humans with 4 cone types. There are some humans with 4 cone types. They have all of the normal cones.
Mutants.
They have all of the normal cones, like what you're looking at, but they also have an abnormal M cone that that you see in some people with color blindness. That there's an abnormal M cone, but there are some people, I think it's mostly women, who have all of the normal cones and they have another cone that's abnormal, and it usually lands somewhere between the green and the red there. So somewhere between the L and the M.
Red.
And in terms of distribution. And here's the thing, they don't tend to have a greater color experience. Like they don't tend to distinguish more hues than the average person. And that's probably because it's redundant information. If you look at the red and green cones, they already overlap by quite a bit. They already provide a lot of redundant information. So another one that's right in the middle of
overlap completely for me.
Yeah, well,
this is why robots see the world differently than us.
But that's why colorblind people can still see and they can still land planes, and because it's not that different of an experience. Of course, we have no way to.
I am not an animal. I am.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
But here, and my point is that while there are human beings that have this extra cone, and that extra cone should provide a lot more colors, it probably doesn't because of how close together the distributions are, and that makes the information redundant. And so, if you think about it, here's the thing: there's actually a lot of variation, not a lot of variation, but there's some variation in this distribution. This is just the average distribution. But if your red and green cones are just a little farther apart, just the distributions are just a little farther apart in the spectral plane here, which some are, you're going to have a slightly different experience than the average person. And so there's really not a perfect, color vision measure. I mean, there's nothing like that.
Whatever Donald Trump sees, it's perfect.
Yeah, it probably is, because he is the greatest.
Well, he has an orange cone.
No, he doesn't. He clearly doesn't see orange.
Perhaps he does.
But then it's not just how these cones are distributed either. these cones feed into those retinal ganglion cells that I was talking about.
Mhm.
And there's all this inhibitory and excitatory process at that level. But then those retinal ganglion cells feed into other retinal ganglion cells, into other cells. And
they
there are
call to
layers of
friend,
cells.
And they
And
call to
yes, exactly. And if you go to the next slide, you can see just what a big old mess this is. And this is just
Ew,
what's in
gross.
the eye. So the cones are what you see on top. And then they feed back into
The
the
cones
retinal
are the.
ganglion cells, the
Okay, so-
red and green and blue things.
I can see by
There's-
this
Oh,
picture
that's
that
just
this
cruel.
clearly was engineered
These
by
yeah,
a moron.
this exactly. Yes. And where do you think the light comes from? The light does not come from the side with the cones on it. It has to go through all these cells to get to the cones.
Yep.
And then but that's so that the nerve can then come out of the eye. And so so anyway, there's this really messy process. And how those cones are distributed across the retina matters. And then all that whole process that it feeds into and the cells down the pathway before it even goes, this is all in the eye. And then it goes out to the brain to be interpreted. So there's a lot of variability here. There's a lot of variability in how they're distributed and how they respond to different wavelengths of light. And this all leads to people classifying colors differently. So there is variation here. There is no perfection. Yeah, that was my point, that there's really no perfect color vision, and it's a highly complex system that a silly 8-question internet quiz can't tell you a whole lot.
Somehow I feel a dress is involved in this.
Address.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
that's
that happens in the
different.
brain.
Yeah,
that happens
that's
in
a
the
brain
brain.
thing. Yep.
That is a brain thing, because the brain is then adjusting for light and so forth. But it matters. It matters because you do, if you do make those adjustments for light, so it does matter. I mean, you're talking about seeing white and gold versus blue and black based on ambient lighting. So it's not just about what happens in the eye, it's also what happens in the brain. And so it's very, very complex. And a silly little, Facebook quiz isn't going to tell you much about your color blindness. There are good tests for it, though.
Okay, so if
some of them are very quick and simple.
How
Like-
would somebody with synesthesia see and taste the dress?
I don't know. I'd have to ask somebody who has that kind of synesthesia.
That's a. Well, that
would be very
that's
interesting.
spicy.
Definitely
Oh God,
sounds-
that's
Taste the dress.
mint.
Definitely sounds blue and black.
Yeah. I don't know. That
Would
would
they
be
have that
an
experience?
that would be an interesting test, actually. 'Cause there's a really cool way that they test for synesthesia, actually, that Ramachandran came up with, where you have these visual searches where things that, like if you have you have 5s and S's, it's harder to tell the difference between, say, a 5 and an S than it is between, say, a 5 and an O.
Mhm.
Or an S and an L.
Oh,
Okay. So
yeah, I've seen this.
yeah, so we do these great visual searches where you embed. You're supposed to be looking for, say, the S, and there's a bunch of 5s. Well, if you paint the 5s red and the S blue, then it's easy to see it, right? Well, what if you are one of those synesthetes that says that 5s are red and S's are blue, and that is what it feels like to you? There's a difference between just having that association and actually having the perceptual experience of it. So while we all may think that we're synesthetic, you can test if somebody is truly a synesthete by giving them these visual search tasks. And if the 5s and the S's are all black and white, black on a white background, they're going to have they're going to be able to react as fast as if the 5s were red and the S's were blue, because that's the way they actually experience it. So their reaction times to finding that's going to be a lot faster than it would be
Wow.
if they saw them all as one color. Yeah, it's really cool, huh?
I am no longer cynical.
I think it's really cool. It's pretty neat. You were skeptical. We've talked about synesthesia here before.
Yes.
But you didn't experience it. Yeah, I did have one more just to show you what a real colorblind test looks like.
Most of us have seen these.
Those are the Ishihara colorblind tests. Yeah, I did talk about the color sorting one, with chips, but that has to be done. There are some online versions of it, but when you're sitting in front of a computer screens display color differently and so forth. So you have to be careful about that. But the Ishihara tests are decades and decades old, and they work really well for identifying color blindness. And there's short ones that are only like 15 that you just do for screening. And if you want to go deeper, there are more extensive tests. So just you've all seen these because you did them when you were kids. They did it, and they're just basically a 15 card version of it that is a basic screening test. But I wonder if Bob can read all these. Probably not the one.
16. Well, they're
you can read the 16,
right?
By
the bottom, by the.
Oh, sorry.
But one looks 12-ish, the other looks 29-ish.
One is 29, and the other one's 15.
You're so full of shit. It's not funny. No, I really can't. I can't see that one. I can kind of see a 1, but who knows? Maybe I'm just.
Yeah, I would have thought that the 15 would have been difficult for you because it's red and green.
Yeah.
So those would blur together for you. Would be all.
Yeah, it's
Do they also kind of look like petri dishes full of some sort of horrible germ plus numbers?
Yes, they do.
I've always thought they all taste like peanut butter.
Haha. What you did there? That's good.
You like that?
That's good. Well done.
Well, that's all I had. That's a very, very basic overview.
I feel like you could probably do a lecture on that for a couple of hours.
You could do a few lectures on
it.
Actually, you could do an entire. I've taken entire courses on it, but you can cover the basics in a couple of lectures. But the problem is you've got to have the background of understanding how neurons work, and then how neurons feed in. And so you've got to have excitation and inhibition, and you've got to know all that stuff before you even start talking about center surrounds and then the layers of cells and how they all feed into M1 and all that, and then they feed into the brain, and then you get things like feature detectors. So layers down, there are layers of cells, and the first cells identify red, green, and blue, but not perfectly. And then they feed into other cells, and they feed into other cells, and eventually you get into cells that only fire when it sees a vertical line. And then there are cells that only fire when it sees a vertical line that is moving. And it gets more and more specific as you go.
Having worked with vision recognition systems, computers and cameras that were designed to recognize patterns or follow them, or and some of the work that we do with the autonomous space robots, they have to look for patterns and home in on them and then try to rendezvous with them, because you can't do that remotely. It has to be done automatically. So we have vision systems that use both stereo views and other kinds of views and filtered views, and look for patterns in them, and then generalize those patterns to something that looks like what we're trying to aim for. And in a lot of cases,
are you leaking space plans now?
No, I'm not. This is all. I mean, this is research projects that have been going on for years. We're just kind of applying a lot of it.
Yeah.
So one of the targets is a round shape. It's like a ring shape, and you do like a fit on various patterns you see. So there's filtering involved at the top layer, and once you get to the right filters, then you try to extract patterns from that.
Yep.
And
the patterns are all. They all use opponent processes too to do that, to do the extraction.
Yeah. And in our case, we're just trying to find location and plot it in 3-dimensional space relative to us.
I'm actually absolutely astonished at the progress that has been made in the last 15 to 20 years, because, when I was in grad school, computers had a tough time just recognizing a rock. Finding a rock in a field, and now you're on Facebook, and it tells you who to tag in the facial recognition stuff is just, it just astonishes me.
Some of that is just the scale of the hardware, really. I mean, we can throw a lot of hardware at problems now, and the data is, I mean, you're getting large sets of data, so it's not like we're doing anything new. It's just we can apply what we knew already on a larger scale.
But there's still crap at telling a rock from a hard place.
That's true. Very true. But Watson can win Jeopardy.
I'm not sure. I could do that. Tell a rock from a hard place.
Yeah, but you're human. They're good at that kind of thing.
Yes and no.
Okay, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that one. Thank you, Barbara. A couple of people were enjoying it on the online stuff.
A few of them were enjoying it way too much.
Yes.
I hope I wasn't
calm them down.
a little too crazy about it, because it's really complicated. Trying to get it down to something bite-sized is really hard.
Cones this, cones that. Not really colorable. There's a guy who claimed it. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, moving right along. No, the only question was about printing. And I don't think any of us are experts on printing, unless you know what those color bars are.
The color bars? What do you mean for
Ben
printing?
Bradley mentioned that there. You ever look at the printed label of like something you get at the grocery store? It's in a bag or something, and somewhere on the label, sometimes there are color bars, like a little pattern thing.
Probably just test bars.
My understanding is it's a way of lining up the different layers, so they don't print it all at once.
Yeah.
They print it in layers, so they have to line up the
Right. They print it in layers because they run it through the cyan and they run it through the
But I'm no
magenta.
expert, so I don't really know what they're doing, but I assume that's what it was.
Yeah.
Sharp by the shoulders and look at Google. That's what I do.
I remember, I used to work in a photo lab, and when I was right out of high school, a year after I graduated high school, I worked in a photo lab.
What?
Photo lab. I know. Yes.
Back when they used chemicals.
Lab, when we used chemicals to make physical negatives. And then the way that you would print pictures is by actually shining light through these little negatives onto photo paper. And you had to do it. You had to do that process with red, green, and blue, and the right amounts of each. And if you wanted to color correct, then you shined, the red for longer or shorter, or the blue for longer or shorter.
And the technology is still. I mean, that's actually one of those.
It's still what we do. We just do it with computers now.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole sub photography art form that it has to do with the original chemicals and stuff, and producing real prints and stuff. But and it does kind of. It produces something that's different. I don't know what the aesthetics of it is, but it does produce something different. So it's not lost completely, but it is not widely used. So because digital cameras are too easy and too cheap. Anyway, moving right along. Eve has got something to say about a big party because the world is ending or something. Again.
As it won't
40th time.
Oh, at least.
Yeah.
So
probably more than that.
Yeah. In an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy's college boyfriend Riley, on discovering who Buffy is, says, "I suddenly find myself needing to know the plural of apocalypse." And it's a funny. It's a funny line.
Do we ever need a plural for?
Well, apparently,
yeah.
It depends on the situation, really.
Apocalypse.
Well, it's a funny line, but it's also dumb because it's apocalypses. You just put an S at the end of it. It's really not that hard. That's how most plurals are formed in English. And second, apocalypses, quite frankly, have been happening, or more crucially, failing to happen, since humans had the capacity to grunt, "End nigh." And we will be having a shiny new apocalypse on Saturday, September 23rd. That's this Saturday.
Well, so I've got time.
Yeah. According to David Mead, who is usually described in the press as a Christian numerologist, although he says he's never called himself that. Instead, he describes himself as a researcher who has studied astronomy at a university in Kentucky, which he declines to name for safety reasons.
What?
Yeah. He also
his safety or the college's safety?
There, surely.
Or the safety of the people listening?
He might be just a wee bit, interesting. Let's put it that way. He also claims to have worked in forensic investigations and to have spent 10 years working in Fortune 1000 companies. And there's some
on
other
the moon.
There's some other claims too. Yeah, Walmart is a Fortune 1000 company. He could have worked there.
Yeah, that's stockroom.
Many people do. Yeah. Anyway, in February,
it's a respectable job.
Yeah. In February 2016, he unleashed a book on the world called Planet X: The 2017 Arrival. If you could bring up the first slide.
Oh my God. Ooh, nice cover.
Yeah. And then this was almost a full month after he'd published.
Needs more circles and arrows.
Yeah, after he'd published. So 1 month after he published Will Planet X Signal the Rapture, which is the next slide.
That's a short book. It's just one blank page with a no in the middle.
Well, okay, I looked at the Amazon previews, and first of all, there didn't appear to be a publisher for either of them. Though one of them's available in paperback now. No copyright. And there is a certain amount of overlap between these two books on the same subject, but not entirely. So he wrote 2 books on the same subject, or published 2 books on the same subject in 2 months. Previous books of his include, and I don't have pictures of all these, I'm sorry, The Prepper's Guide to Surviving EMP Attacks, Solar Flares, and Grid Failures, The Coup d'etat against President Donald J. Trump.
That's a book?
Yeah. Hitler's Escape to Argentina, film treatment. The Coming Clinton Economic Collapse, 2016 to 2017. You can write a best-selling info book. Don't you want to live the dream? And fraud prevention.
Oh, that's my favorite.
I know. I thought that was pretty great.
Oh my God.
And he also wrote the book on irony.
So the Clinton book.
God.
The Clinton book predicts her election. The Amazon description of the book says, and I don't know, I have a weird feeling that he may have written this himself. But it says, among other things, we are very close to financial Armageddon, regardless of the outcome of the election. But with Hillary Clinton in power, there is a very short fuse. You cannot change the world system, but you can make yourself impervious to it, and you can profit tremendously. You must prepare now. Yeah, you must prepare now. If you want to have any chance of surviving what is imminent, you must have this book. More importantly, this book leads you to the last chapter, the end game. This is a detailed description of where Clinton policies are purposely and secretly leading America. It's a revelation every American needs to know. So he's a super reliable prognosticator, as you can tell.
Clearly.
Yeah. Anyway, he and a video by Unsealed, which was published on the prestigious YouTube. Unsealed is an evangelical group. They both predict important events that will begin to happen on Saturday. The video focuses on chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. If you could bring up the next slide.
But haven't we already had the wildfires, earthquakes, and...
Well, yeah. Hang on.
Okay, you're going to get there? Okay.
Oh, yeah. So
An enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns.
Well,
hold it. I saw this movie. Wasn't this a Damien movie?
Yeah. The chapter 12 says a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon, this is the enormous red dragon, with 7 heads, there are presumably more heads, and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, which is what most sons are, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. So, the woman is the constellation Virgo. The 12 stars are the 9 stars of Leo.
Why didn't they just say, okay, Virgo and Leo?
The 9 stars of Leo plus Mercury, Mars, and Venus.
But if you say the stars, it's more stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. The woman is also Mary. Now, Virgo will be positioned over the moon and clothed in sunlight. I'm not sure how exactly. Jupiter, which has been inside Virgo for 9 months, will move outside of Virgo, as it were, being born from Virgo, but also the child is Christ.
It sounds suspiciously like the ramblings of a schizophrenic.
I think he's, well, I don't know. And, the next slide, because and gets to appear on a screen all by itself as the music swells dramatically.
You used a bigger font.
Yeah. So, and Christ and his church. The dragon is Satan and all his little minions. Now, they don't explain...
little wizards.
Yeah. They don't... I was thinking that. They don't explain the stars that will be wiped from the sky. But following the reference to Christ and his church, there's about 2 minutes of what looks like, I don't know, outtakes from a Left Behind film. And there's no dialogue or anything, just the dramatic music. So, anyway, you may be asking, why September 23rd? Why the hell not? But also, according to Mead, it all has to do with the number 33. Quote, Jesus lived for 33 years. The name Elohim, parenthetically, it's a title, not a name. The name Elohim, which is the name of God to the Jews, was mentioned 33 times in the Bible, Mead told the Washington Post. It's very biblically significant, numerologically significant number. I'm talking astronomy, I'm talking the Bible, and merging the two. And also, you see, September 23rd is 33 days after the solar eclipse. So, very prophecy, such omen.
Hey, wow.
According to Mead, the passage in Revelation has something to do with the non-existent planet X or Nibiru. Also, there's something about a pyramid. Because, you know, why not? I bet Mead and the folks at Unsealed are kind of pissed that 3 recent devastating hurricanes and 2 major earthquakes in Mexico and wildfires all happened shortly before September 23rd. But no fear. According to Mead, these natural disasters fulfill the words of Luke 21:25-26. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. So there you go. A lot of people
Michael Bay
seems
film.
very specific.
Yes, Michael Bay film.
Yeah, pretty much. Now a lot of people have joined the September 23rd bandwagon. There are more YouTube videos on the subject. I did not watch more than one. But many are not on board. Ed Stetzer, the Billy Graham Distinguished Chair of Church, Mission, and Evangelism at Wheaton College, that bastion of liberalism, and also the executive director of the Billy Graham Center, called the story fake news and called for Christians to think critically about news related to the end times.
The second edition of the book on irony.
Yeah. To be fair-ish, Mead and Unsealed have learned a lesson from previous less than ground-shaking Armageddons. They don't claim the world will end on Saturday, or even that the rapture will occur. Mead says the prophecies of Revelation will begin to manifest on Saturday.
Blah, blah, blah.
Except, of course, that he's also said that they've already sort of started manifesting.
Of course, because why
yeah.
not take credit for what's happening?
Yeah. He says the world is not ending, but the world as we know it is ending. A major part of the world will not be the same.
He's an REM fan?
That happens
the beginning of October.
Just about every day.
Yeah, there is that. And the YouTube video is titled September 23rd, 2017. You need to see this. Parentheses. Date setting a sign, not the rapture. And the video's description says, note to all scoffers. This is scoffers.
That's you, Eve.
Yeah.
Scoffers.
This is just a sign, all caps. The rapture might not happen on this exact day. Could be this week, next week, or months from now. But we are getting close.
What kind of prophecy? God damn it.
Scoff at your own risk. And for the record, the world won't end for at least 1,000 years. Further, it says, no man knows the hour, or the day or hour, but are you watching? Are you ready? This video is not suggesting that the rapture will happen on September 23rd, but that September 23rd is a sign of the nearness of the rapture. Signs and events themselves do not necessarily happen at the exact same time. Daniel Matson from watchfortheday.org has also made a strong case that the rapture might happen a day or two before this sign. So there. Something's going to happen, but it's not the end of the world, and it's not the rapture, and whatever it is might not actually occur on the 23rd anyway, and it might occur earlier, and it might have already started happening, and
it's not going to happen for 1,000 years.
And the world's not going to end for 1,000 years, but we got to get prepared.
So guys, nobody
dare
living today
you to falsify that, motherfucker. Is what he's saying.
So they just don't make apocalypses the way they used to. But the thing for the world not ending for 1,000 years, there's pre-trib and post-trib. So the idea is you have the rapture, and then there's 1,000-year tribulation or something before everything goes poof.
I see.
And yeah, that's it.
Well,
start
that was
preparing.
Very informative. Well, it's a little late now. We only have 3 days.
Yeah, that's true.
That's okay. I'll just get baptized in 2 and I'll be fucking fine.
There you go. That's a good solution.
That was always my plan.
Yeah.
I've already denied the Holy Spirit, so I'm doomed.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad.
It's okay. Anyway. Who's next? Bob's next.
I am.
You got a thing and stuff?
Yeah, I got a thing.
Something.
It's not a great one.
Who are you stalking?
Well, Jeffrey Beal. Do you know Jeffrey Beal?
Why don't you tell us, Bob?
From Beal's List, which is a up until about a year ago, was a resource that listed a number of questionable, what he called predatory journals. And Jeffrey Beall's a tenured librarian at the University of Colorado in Denver. And for about 5 years, he ran a website that listed a number of questionable publishers. He seems to have been prompted by, I'm going to guess, annoyance at them soliciting work from him. So he came up with this list of predatory publishers who do not have strong editors or peer review process, or you pay to play. There's a whole, list of criteria that get you on this list. And it's a useful resource when you are, certainly when you're teaching students about what may or may not be a reliable journal, right? If they find an article on the web, how good is it? But it is a blacklist site, as opposed to a whitelist, which would list really good stuff. Hooray, right? Nobody likes being on a blacklist, including the publisher Frontiers Media, a Swedish, it's a Swiss publisher, who ended up on the list on Beall's bad side. And one of the things you have to be, you do have to be a little bit careful when you're handling Beall's list, which is actually, when I was at the height of the Brzezinski stuff, that's where all of his papers appeared, on journals that were on Beall's list. There was maybe one exception, but so this has been a useful website in the past, and then it just vanished 9 months ago. Nobody really knew why. There were some suspicions.
There is a Beall's list site up.
Yes, it has been taken over by a European graduate student. Yeah, and it's also alive, I believe, on archive.org. At least one of the more recent versions of it is, or was. So we kind of want to know, everybody kind of wondered what happened, who finally threatened to sue him, right? It was really the question. And there seemed to have been a number of pressures at work here that were, you can see why he might have hesitated to continue this, including a visit from one of the editors, the executive editor in charge of open access at Frontiers, who traveled from Switzerland to Denver in December 2015 to personally argue, this is a quote, personally argue University of Colorado leaders to punish Mr. Beall. He accused the university of, quote, being directly implicated in this absurd and slanderous action, and demanded an investigation of Mr. Beall. Frontiers Media had published an article that questioned whether or not the HIV virus was responsible for AIDS. In 2014, 2015, sometime around there. As one researcher said, most studied virus in the world. So yeah. And then about a year later, and it's hard to do, show cause and effect. A year later, the university opened an investigation into his list, and that's when it disappeared. He says that he's been stigmatized, that they've made his job uncomfortable at the university. We don't have access to verify that one way or the other. Their lawyer says that no internal actions have been taken against him. But he says that he has been confined to basically a student study carol for an office, which actually is not unheard of in academia. Those are some of the only, if you have too many faculty, right, you don't have enough office space, sometimes faculty and graduate students end up in these little carols or postdocs or whatever. They end up in these little study areas, which are really little closets.
But he's not a postdoc or a graduate.
He's a freaking research librarian with tenure. Yeah. So he says of a daily fear of a new supervisor's threats to make his conditions worse. And I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean that he has been given a new supervisor who's ratcheting up the pressure on him, or he's afraid that one day someone new will show up? That's not clear. And so we still don't exactly know what happened, but just last week, or within the last couple of weeks, the spokesperson for the university said that the investigation had wrapped up and there were no findings to report. So
no findings?
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
that's a quote.
They found something.
Quote, no findings or action taken against the professor. His tenure could have been revoked for this because of, I guess they're saying it's like research misconduct. That his scholarship was, quote, unethical and flawed. But, you know, that's an allegation by a company that may have. And the thing is, some of these, you look at the Bogosian thing, and some of these journals are somewhere between reputable and not. You know, he went to took his conceptual penis hoax first to a journal that was not ranked, but as far as we could tell, you know, and they rejected him. But then they referred to a sister, what's the word? Sister publisher, who is under the same imprint or something, another subsidiary of the same publisher, who accepts pay to publish.
Right.
And so it seems that the lines are not as clear as we'd like. He also didn't publish the reasons that these journal articles ended up on his list, or these journals ended up on his list. That makes it hard to verify and assess the quality.
That is problematic. That's a blacklist.
That
doesn't have reason.
And so this was just written about. This appeared in.
Some journals have dogs on their editorial board, though. To
be fair.
True.
Yep.
Yeah, but it doesn't. You know, if he doesn't publish the reasons that he's doing that, there's no check, and there's no justice. He is then the arbiter. You know, if people listen to him, and that's really not. There's no due process there. You know.
Yeah. So according to Paul Baskin's article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, where this came out last week, he said some critics weren't sad to see Beale's list go. It lacked scientific rigor, but others admitted that there's no real way to clearly define a predatory journal. They gave him credit for trying. It's a subjective assessment, Mr. Beale said, and someone trying to keep score just has to make the best case. That's what I did, he said. I made the decisions. It does fall within his scope of expertise, however, you know, as a research librarian.
Sure, but it opens him up to all kinds of liability.
And that's really, like, probably what the university was worried about. Although, if I remember correctly, he had it wasn't a WordPress site, but it wasn't much better. It was a little bit of blogspot site.
The thing is that if it never got attention, nobody would have cared.
Well, and
if maybe he like said these are my opinions only and made it like really clearly disclaimer.
Yeah.
No one would have cared.
Potentially.
I guess maybe if it's popular, no matter what, it's going to get criticism.
Yeah, and then I think there's one of the problems is that there's a comparatively small number of people who care who are publishing there, right? Like if you can publish in a journal, you may have it. Sometimes the requirement is not that you publish in a good journal. You know what I mean? Like, so the incentive is to get something in print is bigger than the incentive to make sure you have something groundbreaking and that can get into a really good journal. So there's that issue as well. Yeah. So it's essentially what killed Beale's list looks like a lot of things. So yeah, that's my story. I wondered what happened to it. I used it rather frequently. I found it not surprising when someone ended up in a pay-to-play journal. Mm-hmm. What was the and there was the one journal when I published in a rebuttal to, or a comment on one of Brzezinski's studies that was referenced in the FOIA materials that we got, and just pointed out, like, there's no mention that these studies were found to be just basically unethical and carried out improperly. So I therefore have to doubt, you know, how good these are, how good this article is. Ever since then, ever since I published there, I've been getting solicitations to give talks at like every neurological conference in the world, to be on the board of editors of all of these. Like, mm-hmm. I'm an English major.
I still get them.
Yeah. So they're aggressive, and you should think, like, if someone like really wants whatever the fuck you have, how good a journal can it possibly be? You know, like, just think through that one a little bit, guys. But Eve, do you have opinions? Huh?
Ready?
Okay, I'm done. Like, yeah,
I'm to go.
Done.
Okay, there you go. Full circle.
Thank you.
Everyone just sat around and listened patiently on that one, and shook their heads and face palmed.
Mm-hmm. Basically, yeah.
I can confirm that on all the Twitter accounts.
Really? Yeah, that's kind of like what happens in my classes.
If just all the students sitting there like this the entire time. Jesus. Okay, I've got one quickie.
I'm going into debt for this.
Oh, that's a student.
That's a student.
I'm pretty sure that I mentioned this or talked about it at least once before. And let me do this little video thing, because this is so cool. Nope, that's not that one. That one. It's this one. You can watch that. So that is a dragonfly. And that's them putting a robotic backpack on a dragonfly.
Jeez.
And here you go. That's dragonfly with a robot backpack. Can you hear the music? It's pretty cool.
Jeez Louise, that is not.
Dragonfly flying with a robotic backpack on it. So this is a milestone video for this company, Rapper, which about 10 years they've been trying to research one particular cybernetic problem. So the idea is that they're going to do some kind of genetic manipulation of dragonflies, and I assume that what that means is this breeding program to create dragonflies that respond to a certain optical stimulation. That there are certain neurons or receptors in their eyes that respond to light in such a way that steer them, like reflexively. So they breed. I'm assuming they're breeding this into there. I don't know their technique, but they call it genetic modification. And the most common form of genetic modification is breeding. So I'm assuming that's what they're doing. I don't know.
And why it took so long.
Maybe. So they also have a sensor pack that they use as a backpack on these things. That's solar powered.
I kind of figured that they already had never mind.
Well,
Sorry.
and it has navigation. Well, the idea is to put some kind of navigation software in it and some kind of remote control or autonomous navigation in it, and use probes to stimulate these steering receptors or whatever they have in the dragonfly, so they can remotely control dragonflies.
Frankenstein level shit here.
This is real. This is happening. Now they don't. My
dragonflies attack them.
Oh my god!
I know. My understanding is that they don't have a completely working unit yet. This video essentially is just proving
a bunch of deformed dragonflies that are just inbred.
This video is just proving that
they're
the
bionic dragonflies.
Yeah, well, it's cybernetic technically.
Manchurian bionic dragonflies.
I guess because
they're
not really.
A whole lot of
we're not controlling their
dragonflies.
We're not making them stronger or adding a blowtorch to them. We're just controlling them, I guess. So it's kind of neat. And like I said, they don't have a working unit yet. I mean, this was essentially just proving that their little sensor pack is small enough and sturdy enough and balanced enough that they can actually put it on a dragonfly and the dragonfly can still fly. Oh my God. So a bunch of parallel efforts going together. So I'm pretty sure that by this time next year, I'll have a video of them, a guy with a little remote control joysticks
and a little dragonfly going, kill me! Kill me!
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Peeta's not going to be happy.
Oh.
Well, I mean, clearly this is just going to be marketed and sold as a cat toy.
Jesse, that would be awesome, wouldn't it?
Clearly.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Or battle dragonflies.
Yeah, it's this
yes.
Yeah, the thing is called Dragonfly, and it's spelled Dragon FLEYE.
Okay, it is battle dragon bots.
Yeah.
I don't think they're strong enough to do battle.
You
but still,
dragonflies
it'd be the coolest drone on my block. That's for sure. Anyway.
Wow.
So I'll put links to that so you guys can read up.
Is there a video of this? Can we see that again?
Again?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was just a short little. There you go. There you go.
Still.
This is them not controlling a dragonfly that they have genetically fucked up.
Yes.
And then glued stuff.
And they have this. Yes. So they've also, they're playing this like Stranger Things music in the background here. So.
Oh my God!
Escape! Escape!
That's it. Well, the other thing to point out
is dragonfly. Those are dragonfly's wings.
Yeah.
He doesn't look like he's flown very far.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to point out is that this is a very, very short video. We only see one clip of the dragonfly.
And it's really slow motion. What we didn't see is the dragonfly,
belly
offer it in.
Yes. So it may have they may have been trying for days to get this dragonfly to fly.
Oh my God! It's like, all right, just someone
one
get a
good
fan,
run,
and he flew 6 inches, so they slowed it down.
Video.
So we don't really know. This is not really a video showing us much of anything.
Oh, that's hilarious, and yet terrifyingly and horrifying and
baby steps to
I'm
robot apocalypse.
They're like make little robot ants or something to ride on the dragonflies, and like a little lance and other weapons, and you can have dragonfly joust.
Oh my God! Cybernetic flea circus.
There you go. I'm sure the Curious Cybernetics company is working on that right now.
God.
Yeah.
Yes. I hope I live long enough to see a cybernetic flea circus. That would be awesome.
Oh my God.
God. DARPA's weird.
DARPA is weird. And in the most awesome way.
Oh my God.
Alrighty then. So we did a show. You guys watched. Thank you. Let's do our book time thing and wrap this baby up.
Okay.
Who's got a book?
I have a book.
Go.
As mentioned in Retinas, page 44, S-cones constitute only about 10% of the cone population and are absent from the center of the fovea. S-cones are most sensitive to photons with frequencies at the high end of the visible spectrum. But when the eye is in focus to the frequencies to which M and L cones are most sensitive, the image is out of focus for S-cones as a result of chromatic aberration.
I thought, as mentioned in Retinas, which I thought Retinas was like a TV show or something.
No, just a chapter.
Or a Broadway musical. Retinas live. No. Who's next? Go, Eve. You got a book?
Before considering the role of both genders in migration and diaspora, some basic questions on how to study gender in the past must be addressed. In particular, those of identifying men and women in the surviving evidence. Viking Age archaeologists have been much exercised by this question, partly because so much of their evidence comes from burials, where establishing the sex of the occupant is not always a straightforward matter, nor is there much evidence to enable complex analyses of the relationship between sex and gender. It is also a problem for archaeologists that the sexes appear not to be equally represented in the burial record, and the meaning of this imbalance can be difficult to determine. The imbalance is not always in favor of men.
Okay. This is something about that quote. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm 3 days into my cleanse, and my family is not impressed. They are ready to cleanse me from their lives. My sanity is questioned, my company avoided. My eating habits are characterized as revolting. And to add insult to self-inflicted injury, they tell me my breath stinks.
Okay, I'll use this one. But it was considerably better. This is continuing from a previous paragraph. But it was considerably better than my current defensive armament, which consisted of harsh words and heavy disapproval. Probably not effective against Klingons. What's your book, Barbara?
Okay. It is First Steps in Seeing by R.W. Ruddock.
Well, it's good to have a college-level book that teaches you how to see.
Yeah.
It's not right.
That's philosophy.
Yeah. Oh. R.C. Go ahead. Eve, what's your book?
Well, my book is called The Viking Diaspora by Judith Jesch, and I'm not going to hold it up because there's a lovely picture on the front of Shetland, but it has a big interlibrary loan sticker slapped across it.
Oh. Bob?
Timothy Caulfield, is Gwyneth Paltrow wrong about everything?
Oh,
that's
How is that not a short book?
Law of headlines.
That's awesome.
I think I saw that one somewhere.
I may have used it before.
Yeah, maybe.
But
I've never seen it. I think it's cool. What's yours?
Mine is a book called We Are Legion, We Are Bob. And it is the first of a 3-part series, the Bob.
It sounds great.
I know.
We don't want a legion of
different kind of Bobs. Trying to show the cover. It essentially, it's got everything. It's got sci-fi references. It's got a guy from our century who turns into an AI in the future that's traveling the universe and investigating stuff and has to deal with remnants of human society and aliens and death machines and all kinds of stuff. It's a wonderful read. I'm on the 3rd book and I'm just chewing through them. So if you like this kind of stuff, check it out. The first one, I mean, the last one was just published recently, but it started 3 or 4 years ago. And Wonderful, wonderful books. Lots of fun. Okay, then. There's the cover. Cover. We are Bob. Thankfully, a different Bob.
There's so few of them.
So
many Bobs.
Announcements.
Do we have announcements?
I got a shout out on Skeptoid this week. That's all. Yeah.
Oh. So they just said hi.
Kind of. No, I gave the working definition of the Big Pharma conspiracy theory.
Huh. Cool. I'll check it out. Any other announcements from anybody else on the panel? No? You guys aren't doing anything?
Nope.
I'm going to Vermont.
You are? Where are you going? Where?
I'm not entirely sure. It's middle of nowhere.
Are you being taken at gunpoint?
That's most of Vermont.
I've never been to Vermont.
For what?
Family thing.
Vermont is beautiful.
I'm bringing my bike, so I'm gonna ride and take pictures.
Yeah.
It may already be snow covered.
Stunning.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've heard it would be, nice this weekend. So we'll see.
Did you hear that we had a hurricane?
I did.
Yeah, we barely made it through Jose alive.
Yeah.
There
was a lot of
a leaf almost hit me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Terrible.
I myself had to endure a day of a kind of warm mist.
Well, prepare for Maria. She's coming.
Yeah.
Always true. Whether it's a hurricane or not. There's always a Maria.
There's always a Maria. Okay. Put that down in Proverbs that mean nothing.
Oh my God. I can't believe those crazy end of the world people didn't manage to associate Maria with Virgo and the woman in Revelation. What's wrong with them?
Up with that?
And Nambia.
And they published the list of names that they're going to use for named storms ahead of time, so they could have predicted it.
Made a decent guess.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Nambia, the world's top producer of covfefe.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Oh, he's a fucking idiot.
On that note.
Yeah. Before Bob goes completely insane.
Putting on the logo.
Hi, I'm gone.
Virtual Skeptics is an independent production of whatstheharm.net. Skeptical News, myself, ICDS Everywhere, and Doubtful News. The logo is designed by Sarah Menu at sarahmenu.com, and our free music is by Musicamp and user permission. If I ever kill you, you will be awake, you will be standing, and you'll be armed.
Oh, we forgot to do the